I'm here with our very special guest, Chairperson of Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, Madam Hina Jilani. Let's just start with the performance of this parliament and what it represented. What do you have to say about that? Was it really the worst?
The government that had come into power was the result of political engineering done very deliberately and in a planned manner by the military. Let me say that Khaqan Abbasi has said this is the worst parliament. I would say that this is the parliament that continued to work till the end of its tenure in the worst conditions that any parliament has seen.
Now, Imran Khan remains arrested while he can appeal his disqualification or his arrest. And then we are looking at various conspiracies being played out in the international press, like the cyber press, which is silly for some people, and some people think it's like, oh my God. What do you have to say to that? And also about how much in control the Pakistani military is?
Pakistan's democracy has always been vulnerable. And I must also say here that this democracy is not just vulnerable at the hands of the military or even the civilian political leadership. It is vulnerable at the hands of the mindset of its own people and its own society.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to New Wave Global. I'm Rabia Mehmood. Today, I'm here with our very special guest, Chairperson of Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, Madam Hina Jilani, also Pakistan's foremost human rights activist and an expert on constitution and international human rights law. What are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk about the outgoing National Assembly, which has just finished its tenure. The assembly stands dissolved. The PDM government's assembly, to be precise, as they took power in April after Imran Khan's ouster. We've seen that the former Prime Minister Shahid Khaqan Abbasi has called it the worst parliament or National Assembly in the history of Pakistan. And one of the key issues was all the hastily passed legislations, laws which have strengthened already discriminatory and draconian laws in the country, and the kind of powers and authority which has been given to the Pakistani intelligence agencies and the military. So what we've seen is that now the surveillance and surveillance over the Pakistani citizens and their rights are bound to be further suppressed. And these are just two of the issues. And in the midst of all this, Pakistani citizens, they remain haunted by soaring inflation and the multiple crises which are facing them and the country at the moment. So, Hina ji, let's just start with the performance of this parliament and what it represented. What do you have to say about that? Was it really the worst?
Well, to assess this parliament, I think let us start with the beginning. This parliament came into existence in 2018. There were deep schisms within the political circles and within the parliament itself, where several parties had, of course, very clear ideas that the government that had come into power was the result of political engineering done very deliberately and in a planned manner by the military. And many things that have now been either confessed to by the parties themselves, which is the military and Imran Khan, now has revealed that those allegations of the opposition at that time were not misconceived. So we are pretty sure that these guys did know that selection had taken place. These people occupied their seats in the parliament despite their reservations against the legality and the legitimacy of the government. Also, they suffered a lot throughout in terms of vengeance, retaliation, repression. And it was not just the Pakistan Muslim League or the People's Party, but other political parties and political personalities also suffered at the hands of this government's, I would say, illegal attempts to silence the opposition, in fact, to decimate it. They remained in parliament, and this is, I think, something that we have to understand. They did not leave the parliament. Then comes the vote of no confidence. the first person to quit the parliament and thereby leave the institution vulnerable was Imran Khan himself. And then what he does is he dissolves two national assemblies. And as he has himself said, he did this at the asking of the then military chief. So I see this as a political malafide on his behalf. And then a mess was created. Let me say that Hakan Abbasi has said this is the worst parliament. I would say that this is the parliament that continued to work till the end of its tenure in the worst conditions that any parliament has seen. What the performance of the government was is something else altogether. I think on the economic side, I don't think that even if it was the best government in the world could have dealt with the crisis that they were left with once they took power. Their own policies also failed to restore any kind of economic security, let alone any kind of stability. So that I'm not, in fact, evaluating because I don't think it was in their power. They had raised expectations at the end of the vote of no confidence unrealistically and as a bravado, which was wrong on their part. They had too much confidence in their ability to do anything. They did not. They had no such ability. But on the political side, I think instability really hounded this parliament as well as the government throughout the period. Now, I think this is important to understand that both Imran Khan and maybe majorly him, but also the government failed to do anything to stabilize the situation. Imran Khan, of course, had all kinds of, tricks up his sleeve that he tried to play while trying to dominate or blackmail the military. He had nothing to do with the parliament as such. He wouldn't even talk to them. So there was never any attempt. All he did was trying to win back the military and forcing them, either blackmailing them or forcing some kind of an action by the military to support him again to come into power. His anger against the military is not because he doesn't want them to step into the political process or to interfere with it. His anger at them was that they should have interfered to support him and to continue to decimate his opposition. This was, I think, the reason why a lot of things that the parliament did in terms of mistakes that they made, they tried to strengthen the controls through legislation. That was absolutely unacceptable. So these are some of the things that I think we must remember about this parliament, that it continued to function in a very weak way. It was a very weak parliament, beset by many, many problems. The only thing that we can say is that it lasted till now. And if you give some credence to what I'm saying, look, there were at least two legislations in the more recent past, which were dropped because there was a parliament, because there were 2 or 3 or 4 people in the parliament who raised the hue and cry. So the existence itself of the institution, though a weak one, was able to defer at least some 1 or 2 very obnoxious legislations, like the extreme violent extremism law, for instance. And certain amendments that were made in the other laws, such as the Official Secrets Act, although I think that itself remains a very obnoxious legislation to this day, and we will probably have to fight it. But the thing is that because voices were raised in an institution that was able to exist despite all adversity, gives us a sense of how important the parliament is as an institution, and therefore gives us this sense that we have to fight for its strengthening more vigorously.
True, true. Hinaji, thank you for also putting this into context of the past 5 years, because we are so sort of distracted, I must say, by what happened, what has been happening over the last year and a couple of months since the vote of no confidence, that somehow we kind of, it just skips our mind, not in the way that we have forgotten what was happening, that yes, this current parliament came into power in 2018, and then, like you mentioned, two provincial assemblies dissolved, vote of no confidence, the complete sort of allegiance to the military and the ISI previously by Imran Khan, and that was a hybrid rule or a hybrid regime. And then we had the PDM government, which raised expectation and failed remarkably, I must say, I have to say this. And then, of course, there were the floods and other issues, but at the same time, they have also turned into it was also a hybrid rule of another sort, like hybrid rule 2.0, as people have been calling it. So that's that. And now Imran Khan remains arrested while he can appeal his disqualification or his arrest, and that's one thing. And then we are looking at various conspiracies being played out in the international press, like the cipher press, which is silly for some people, and some people think it's like, oh my god, some great conspiracy which was sort of set in motion to topple the country. I want your take now on how you've mentioned Imran Khan and the military and the laws. Now we see people are saying, and it appears that any political gains and democratic gains which were made after 2008, when Musharraf was ousted, those have been reversed, and Pakistan's democracy remains as vulnerable, even more vulnerable, not as vulnerable as before. What do you have to say to that? And also about how much in control the Pakistani military is?
Look, I don't agree that after 2008, we can say that Pakistan's vulnerability and Pakistan's democracy's vulnerability in any way decreased. Pakistan's democracy has always been vulnerable. And I must also say here that this democracy is not just vulnerable at the hands of the military or even the civilian political leadership. It is vulnerable at the hands of the mindset of its own people and its own society. If you look at it from the position of the more vulnerable groups in this country, their democratic rights have never been able to prosper these populations, either politically or socially or even economically. So I would say that the vulnerability always existed. Now, what happens when there is an existing vulnerability, and those who have the responsibility and the role to continuously try to strengthen institutions? These are the institutions themselves. The parliament, the judiciary in particular, have a role in this strengthening of democracy. As I have said earlier, from 2018 to 2023, when the parliament was dissolved yesterday, I do see that there were some attempts to make sure that the parliament exists. I acknowledge that. But at the same time, the performance of the parliament remained very weak. And what is more important is that the ability of the political leadership in this country to safeguard the civilian space has been very, very disappointing. And I would also add here that in this context of the military's, let us say, more visible strengthening hold on policy making, on decision making, has become more apparent after the 9th of May. I see this, that when this government came into power and this coalition government, a coalition of opposition of parties took hold after the vote of no confidence, there was still a little bit of a ray of hope that they will keep to the agenda because of the trends that had bit them in the past. And I didn't think that they would sustain it, but I didn't also think that there would be such a fast descent into that mode where the military was once again looked at as the tool to be used, or their own selves becoming the tools that the military can use to promote its own safety or interests. I think we should also realize that this whole Project Imran Khan has affected the military as an organization more deeply than anything else. And some of the concerns of the military are legitimate. I do see that. But those concerns are best addressed when they look inside their own organization, rather than trying to set things out through civilian interference in civilian affairs. These politicians, if they think that they cannot sort out mess created by the military in a political way, they don't have the right political strategies or capacities or the ability to seize trends which are affecting civilian supremacy, then they should not take that leadership. Instead of saying that what the mess that military has made, now it should clean it up. This is the major mindset that we see, especially in the PMLN leadership. They have created the mess. Now they should clear it up and create an even playing field. You should clear it up. The Prime Minister saying a few days ago that it doesn't matter to him that people think that he is a very pro-military person. It doesn't matter to him, but it matters to us. Because even though it's a reality that Pakistan's military has always dominated, that's a reality we are in the business of changing. So I do think that they did descend into it. Major again, blame goes to Imran Khan for what he did on the 9th of May. Because as far as optics are concerned, and here I'm not being naive, I'm just talking about optics. The neutrality issue was just an optic. Maybe there was never a genuine intention to remain neutral or remain out of civilian space. But you look at the optics. The chief of army visited the parliament, and in his speech, he almost said that we are subservient to you. You are the masters. So these were working as good optics for the civilian leadership and the population to understand their own supremacy, and therefore take advantage of these optics to ensure that supremacy is in some ways more visible because of these optics. They failed to do that. They failed to safeguard that space after the 9th of May. And it was mostly because of panic. The fact that there was a popularity of the very popular, what do you call it, these kind of leadership, like the Imran Khan leadership, which has no substance, but just popularity. These are things that astute leadership, especially when there are 13 of these political parties, they should have put their head together and found the strategy themselves. So these are some of the things I think show us that there is a hard time now facing us. And a lot now rests, not just with the political leadership, but also with the civil society. When the political leadership is dithering, we have to make our voices heard. We don't have the outreach of the political parties, so we may not be able to affect public opinion to that extent. But where the public mindset has been totally polluted with regard to how you look at democracy and how you want to safeguard democracy and how you want truth and not propaganda to rule the public space, then I think we have at least to make a try. We have to make sure that we do our job. We are able to stand together and spread awareness and try to instill the values that we have certainly lost in this whole process. I don't think Pakistan's public was ever a very good electoral and informed public ever. But at the same time, I think there have been periods where that awareness has come in people. I think the 70s was such a period. I think the resistance against Ziaul Haq's martial law not just because of its illegality, but because of the policies it was pursuing and dividing the population both religiously and ethnically. There was resistance. So awareness came during that time. Benazir's time, and especially after her assassination, suddenly there was a surge of awareness also, which was, of course, together with the kind of depression that we faced after her assassination. So there have been periods. But at the same time, we need now to revisit the strategies that we as the civil society were able to construct in order to affect to a certain extent the public opinion. Now we have a big task with the kind of technology that is available for propagandists to affect the public mind, the ready acceptance of falsehood and propaganda. It is not just within Pakistan, but it is worrying us even about how the diaspora are a part of this intentionally or unintentionally, because they're absorbing the kind of propaganda that very astute people who are so well skilled in using that propaganda machine.
True. Thank you so much, Hinaji. And of course, at the end, your point about strengthening of civil society and the role that the civil society must play in the face of all kinds of onslaught on democracy and people's rights, and specifically also through the digital space. And interesting that you mentioned the diaspora at the end. We've seen that the American diaspora, Pakistani diaspora in the US, members of PTI have publicly spoken against and tried to make a case against the IMF bailout package that Pakistan has gotten. This just happened last week of July. So it's unfortunate how yes, true that people are consuming falsehood, but at the same time, and are kind of sort of not victim to, but are ready consumers of propaganda. And yet at the same time, it's just that they believe that they are absolutely on the right side, and it's a widespread issue outside Pakistan as well. And
would you permit me to say something, just one sentence, which I failed to mention? You mentioned the IMF deal. I don't think it is a cause for celebration, certainly, and I don't think the government took a celebratory note either. But this was extremely important. And I do say here that this must have taken a lot of time, energy, and effort on the part of this government. And this kind of time that they spent on being able to make this deal was crucial, because what would have happened if the deal was not there is something that people don't generally understand. And this had taken a lot of their mind off some of the other political things that they might have been able to do if they had the time. So let me also say this. While I do find it disappointing that they were not able to use the political space they had enough to safeguard their own supremacy and to give people their rights, I do believe that this was certainly something that should go in their favor.
True, definitely. And this is not an endorsement of the circumstances which have brought us to, this point that we were looking towards the IMF. This is not endorsement of the institution or anything. It's terrible. I do think regardless of what anyone said, Pakistan is not defaulting. I think we're constantly on the brink of default if we haven't defaulted altogether. It's a matter of interpretation. Not that we are economists here. But Hinaji, thank you so much for your brilliant insights and putting into context the past 5 years for us and what it means for Pakistan. We'll keep, of course, next time we'll be speaking about elections with you, but in our next episode and the way forwards. Thank you to our viewers. Thank you for watching New Wave Global. Khudafis.